WLRN edition 106 in 5, 4, 3, 2.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings and welcome to the 106th edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, February 6th, 2025. This is Aurora here, biological feminist and ardent reality enthusiast. For this month's edition, we'll be focusing on ecofeminism. We will hear an excerpt of a live stream discussion we held on January 11th about my new book, Man Against Being, Body Horror and the Death of Life, which was published by Spinifex this past November, as well as commentary from WLRN's graphic designer and artist, Margaret. As the world burns and we bear ever more agonizing witness to the delusional destructiveness of male dominion's reign, we thought it appropriate, as well as necessary, to have a look at mankind's ecocidal madness for ourselves together, as a group of women serious about revolt against male rule, about revitalization of human society and the biosphere along with it, and about simply being alive, flesh and blood inhabitants of the living earth. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's Mary with women's news from around the globe for this Thursday, February 6th, 2025.
Thanks, Aurora. While cancer rates have leveled out for men, they have been climbing for women, especially among younger women. The American Cancer Society reports that middle-aged women have a slightly higher risk than middle-aged men, and younger women are almost twice as likely to be diagnosed with cancer than young men. Rebecca Siegel, Senior Scientific Director of Surveillance Research at the American Cancer Society, said, "Breast and thyroid cancer account for almost half of all cancer diagnoses in women younger than 50. In Indonesia, a man attacked his ex-girlfriend with acid in late December. Acid attacks, especially those against women, have been on the rise in recent years. Andy Yantriani, chairperson for the National Commission on Violence Against Women, said, "The men know the usage of acid materials will disfigure the women, and hence it will actually limit the opportunity of the woman to be in relation with other persons." Some politicians have called for stricter laws regulating the sale of certain chemicals. Ms. Yantriani also believes that the government should help women pay for the extensive surgeries required after these attacks. Within the first week of his second term, Donald Trump signed an executive order entitled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. This executive order defines female as a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell, leading many feminists to be concerned that it will be weaponized in abortion rulings and determinations as it includes language pertaining to fetal personhood. While it acknowledges biological sex, it also uses paternalistic language and does not acknowledge the other side of gender extremism, traditional gender roles. Donald Trump, Vice President Vance, and House Speaker Mike Johnson all spoke at the March for Life. Vance declared, "Our society has failed to recognize the obligation that one generation has to another is a core part of living in society to begin with. So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America." And Johnson promised that the opposition to abortion is entering a new era with the election of Trump and Vance. Pete Hegseth has been confirmed as Defense Secretary despite accusations of sexual assault and domestic violence. In a written answer to Senator Elizabeth Warren's questions during the vetting process, he confirmed that he paid the sexual assault victim a $50,000 settlement. A sworn affidavit from his former sister-in-law also provides evidence of domestic violence. However, described as a good man by President Trump, Hegseth claims that he is the victim of a smear campaign. He was still confirmed. During the beginning of a fragile ceasefire, female Israeli hostages and hundreds of imprisoned Palestinians have been released. While the releases continue, Palestinians begin to return to their bombed-out neighborhoods. Since the October 7th attack, tens of thousands of people have been killed. The UN estimates that women and children account for nearly 70% of all casualties. After moving his family back to Pakistan from the United States, a man has confessed to murdering his teenage daughter. It appears that the girl's father was angered by her social media content, lifestyle, and clothing, and her brother-in-law has also been arrested in connection with her murder. In Pakistan, men kill over 1,000 women a year because of perceived slights against their honor. In this case, the girl was 15 years old. Female Sudanese refugees recount their experiences of being trafficked to Libya. The BBC interviewed several women, one of whom described rape and torture at the hands of the men who trafficked her and her family from Egypt to Libya. She became pregnant, so her husband abandoned her and their children. Another woman explained that, after her husband never returned after going out to look for work, her teenage daughter was raped and threatened. But since she has no money to pay off the traffickers, she and her children are stuck in Libya. We have barely any food. My son is afraid to leave the house as other children often beat him and insult him for being black. I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. More than 210,000 Sudanese refugees are now in Libya, according to the UN. Karim Khan, the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor, has requested arrest warrants for the supreme leader and chief justice of the Taliban's government in Afghanistan. He also included the LGBTQI community in his statement. Khan also said that the opposition to the Taliban is brutally repressed through crimes including murder, imprisonment, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, enforced disappearance, and other inhumane acts. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for Thursday, February 6th. I'm Mary. Share your news stories, announcements, and tips with us by emailing info@WLRNmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
This is Joe Brew, and you are listening to WLRN.
That was Allison Lorenzen with Heaven is a Place on Earth. The song was Aurora's musical choice for this month's show, an old 80s pop favorite reimagined with somber elegance. If man-made civilization is obsessed with dreaming up heavens above, off, and as far away as possible from earthly reality, a fantastic justification for exploiting and assaulting the living world, then the ecofeminist answer is to cease chasing heavens elsewhere and love this earth as it is, and ourselves as the earthly creatures we are. Next up, we'll hear the first 30 minutes or so of a roundtable discussion WLRN held on January 11th as a live stream. Thistle, Margaret, and Aurora discuss concepts ranging from dualism, our birthright as creatures on the planet, pain and joy, and the value of being in touch with our feelings and empathy, what it means to revere life and value as it is sacred outside the patriarchal religious realm, the body, and much more related to Aurora's book. To hear this discussion in its entirety that includes comments and questions from WLRN's Mary O'Neill, in addition to Margaret and Thistle's, please go to WLRN's YouTube channel and click on the Live tab, where you can tune in to the live, unedited discussion in its entirety. But for now, take a listen to these excerpts.
I hope the insights and wonders of discussing Aurora's book engage all of us into a new way of being that ends male dominion, as Aurora puts it, and brings forward our powers of regeneration as a class, as women, as a whole, and as our individual selves. That interplay between the one and the many and the permeability and vulnerability of our shared soft bodies is what enraptured me into not just reading, but drinking in Aurora's exquisite work that is both rich in form and content. It's a wonderful read and so timely. My hope is that our show today gives you, the audience, the taste you need to run, not walk, to your local library and request this book be on the shelf for all. And then buy your own copy from our sisters at Spinifex Press and start a book club in your area. That's how impactful and exciting this book is for our women's movement 2025 and into the future. And I'm also super excited to have here in the virtual WLRN studios with us, Aurora Linnea. She is the author of Man Against Being, Body Horror and the Death of Life, and she'll be talking with us today about that book. Welcome, Aurora.
Hi, Thistle. Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, well, let's start with your childhood before we dive into the book. In your acknowledgement section, you write, "I thank my parents for raising me to be a feral creature and for showing me true nonconformity," unquote. Please tell us more about how you grew up and how it shaped your worldview and the writing of the book.
Sure. So I think sort of the most formative thing about my childhood that's relevant here is that both my parents are veterinarians. So I grew up constantly surrounded by, and in fact more sort of socialized with non-human rather than human animals. We always had dogs, cats, birds, rabbits. I had chinchillas. There were mice. I rode horses. My mom was in veterinary school during the time that I was in elementary school, and I spent a lot of time there with her and with animals. And then my dad, actually, the other thing that's really, when I was with my mom at the veterinary school, she'd take me to lectures with her and things like gross pathology labs, gross as in big, not yucky. And I would like watch people dissect and look at horse livers full of worms and things like this. So I saw a lot of the body in a very visceral and clear way growing up. My dad also had his own veterinary practice in New Hampshire, and I spent a lot of time in the summers that I spent there tagging along on farm calls with him and helping hold down pigs and goats and sheep so that they could get their vaccinations and catching baby goats and farms and things like this. And so I really grew up very, very aware of animals and bodies and the realities of being an animal body and all of the vulnerabilities that go along with that, as well as the reality of death. These were all very palpable and present in my childhood. As far as my parents' parenting philosophy, I'll say that both of my parents are really intelligent, but also idiosyncratic and iconoclastic people. My mom was a punk who loved science and then put herself through vet school and was always a fiercely independent single mom. And my dad is sort of an aspiring wilderness hermit. And so he taught me a lot about the wilderness and was definitely more geared towards that than human society. So those were really important grounding and developing things in my childhood that led me to the strange place I am now.
Oh, it's a wonderful place. It's a place that's alive with poetry and nature and, the stuff of life. It's been such a joy to read your writing, Aurora. So how did you come up with the title? It's a very provocative title. Like I was out reading and had it on the table and somebody was like, what? It kind of turns your head. So how did you come up with that title?
Sure. I really like titles. Often I have titles lined up for works well ahead of even really outlining the piece. Especially with poetry projects, that's almost always the case. But with regards to this book, I had the book outlined in my mind for quite a while under several different titles before I came to Man Against Being. And in fact, before I was working with Spinifex, my title was Men Against Being, but I think the tweak to make it singular is an improvement. Before I had Man Against Being, I knew I wanted to do body horror and the death of life because I really liked the starkness of the juxtaposition of death and life there. As you said, I felt that it was provocative, even the insinuation that life itself could be killed or was the target here. Because I also wanted to be quite direct and straight to the point, in that you could say that patriarchy enacts violence against all sorts of different groups, as it certainly does. But that is the larger scale thing, the sort of overarching thing is this rejection of and violence towards life itself. It's actually a deep antagonism towards living that drives all these other forms of violence.
Necrophilia.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so I wanted that to be really upfront, upfront in the title. And from that is where I came to Man Against Being, because I was trying to figure out, like, what is it exactly that man is posed against ultimately, and it's creation, it's being, it's life.
But yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, but he also has an instinct, because he is an animal, as you point out.
Mm-hmm.
As much as he doesn't want to be, he is. I mean, doesn't he have an instinct, like every living creature, to live? So. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, certainly, I think that's an important distinction to make too. Is that individual men are animals, are humans, right? Obviously, but the sort of conglomerate that is the system, which is what I am referring to when I say man, that is bigger than individual men, and individual men become agents of this larger man. And that man, I think, does not have a strong life instinct.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that. I'm gonna move on to my next question, because I think a lot of people, you yourself talk in the beginning of how grim the book is. It's difficult to read. I had emotional responses as I was reading your book. It's painful in parts because the perversion of man that you so solidly researched and gave example after example. I think Lear Keith was like page after pounding page, but those painful pages also brought with them an incredible hope in realizing that we are hardwired mammals that wish to live and have a communion with nature and life. So let me give you an example of your writing on page 243, and also the listener, please hear this. It's beautiful. Aurora says on page 243 in the last chapter about what is to be done to resolve man's deadly madness, you state, quote, "Desensitized indifference and disdain for softness are unnatural to the animals we are, distortions of our native grace, the care of others inbred in our inheritance from the living world, defined as it is by nurturant and symbiotic interconnectedness. Empathy is nature's law of succor, manifest in the earthly organisms we are, experienced inwardly as an urge to exist in compassionate relation with others," end quote. So much of unlocking our healing regenerative powers lie in resensitizing ourselves to our bodies and what's materially real, and feeling the pain, but also to see how our soft and vulnerable bodies are connected, and how we're all in this together, and that we can even rejoice in that oneness. Can you talk about the pain of the book, but also the joy of it?
Yeah. Thank you for that summary of the sort of coexistence of pain and despair and the joy and aliveness that I'm trying to communicate, and which I understand as being as necessarily accompanying being aware and attentive to the living world, and what man has done and continues to do to it. It is horrible to bear witness to the harms and the degradations and the desecrations and atrocities that man-made civilization perpetrates daily. It's overwhelming, and almost unthinkable, the extremity and seeming endlessness of male violence. Right now, as we're speaking, there's a genocide. There are men at war. Men are perpetrating war in the Ukraine and Sudan. There's deforestation and the killing of the oceans that continues apace. How many women are being prostituted today? How many women how many women will be murdered by male partners by the time we reach tonight? How many will be beaten? How many girl children will be sexually abused today? There are mines. There are men raising foxes and groundhogs and birds' homes to build suburban sprawl McMansions that only rich white men can afford. And I just read the other day that the Humane Society estimates that 1 million animals are hit by cars each day and killed. Meanwhile, there's all of the animals in the industrial farm system living in really tortured conditions in confinement facilities. And this is today, and that will still be the way it is tomorrow. And it goes on and on. All of this is happening. All of this pain is being inflicted within men's systems, the systems that structure our own lives. And it's almost more suffering than can really be imagined, much less contemplated or sat with or absorbed. And yet, the alternative to taking in this pain is the dull, anesthetized, and alienated, careless, selfish numbness that is the callousness that really defines male dominion's whole sort of psychic and emotional ethos. I'm in pain in this world because others are in pain, because beings are being harmed. And I'm glad that I am capable of being in pain in that way, because it means that I'm alive and I haven't been deadened by the system in which I exist. And so I think it's really important to face suffering and to be willing to suffer in a suffering world, and never to close down to it, but rather to celebrate the capacity for feeling and for empathizing with other creatures that is so natural to the miracle of being alive. Because being alive really is such a miracle when you think of all the conditions that had to come into place perfectly for life to even come into existence on Earth. And we should revere that and not squander it by making living such a painful ordeal for so many. So pain and joy are not dichotomous or mutually exclusive in any way. So it's maybe better to say that if our joy can only exist if pain is excluded or ignored, that joy is ultimately a tepid and cowardly thing. Loving life means being willing to be hurt.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for that, Aurora. And we've got Margaret now. She's going to ask.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. That was just awesome to hear about your childhood and to know how really you can kind of understand a little bit better how you can accept the pain that you're talking about when you kind of grew up with death and animals, in such a hands-on manner and all. That's just awesome. So in your book, I was especially interested in your description of somatophobia and how feminists are, noticing how that feminists have talked about this for a while, the issue of body hatred and all that. And you mentioned that Elizabeth V. Spellman invented the word somatophobia. And so I went and I found her article, Women as Body, Ancient and Contemporary Views from 1982. And I also have Mary Daly's Gyne Ecology book. So I was looking at that and noticing some of what she was discussing back in 1978, which was when I was in college, by the way. But it was interesting to review the fact that feminists have been discussing like how Plato and society embraced body hatred and this idea that males have souls and as if women don't. Anyway, feminists have been kind of looking into that for at least 50 years. And And I'm also keenly aware of the fact that some feminists really hate the idea of women being more connected to nature and life itself than men, although I like to feel like I'm connected to life and nature. So yeah, and so that's part of why I appreciate your book. I really kind of feel like as long as people continue to think that men are closer or more like God than women, and that women's connection to life makes us somehow bad, this will always be a problem. I think it's important to our planet, like you say, and all the things that kind of industrialized society is doing. But I hope that people can get to recognizing the human impact, especially industrialized type humans, and appreciate life and all that. So anyway, it's great to have more books that address all this. The more the better, and I'm happy to see your book as part of this discussion. Would you like to comment on the feminist history as it relates to your book?
Sure, yeah. I think you make great points. Feminists and ecofeminists in particular have indeed been arguing against patriarchal, I say it's somatophobia. It's definitely a mouthful, so I don't know. I've never heard anyone other than me really say it. So the women have been arguing against patriarchal somatophobia and its discontents for decades, 50 years, as you mentioned. And yet somehow this criticism has not really managed to enter in as a standard tenet of the feminist, or even really the radical feminist analysis of man-made civilization and its harms and various systems of harm. So it's common enough for feminists to complain of men viewing or treating women as just bodies in, say, prostitution or pornography, and not as people. But what does this opposition really mean? That bodies are not people and people are not bodies? The fundamental dualistic conceptualization remains unchecked here. Women say they want to be more than just their bodies. But what is wrong with being a body? How did this become a bad thing? These are the questions which I really was seeking, for which I was really seeking answers in my research, because I think they get at the most sort of basic fractures and alienations and antagonisms of the world that men have made. They're ideological questions. Another thing that feminists will argue, especially in more liberal feminist realms, is that women come to hate their bodies because of objectification and unrealistic, quote unquote, unrealistic beauty standards. So the remedy is this business of sort of body acceptance, or what's known as body positivity, which mostly comes down to a matter of convincing oneself that one is sexy, no matter what, no matter your shape or size. Like if you're not a size 2, 6 foot tall blonde with fake breasts and Instagram face, you too can be sexy. That's body positivity, unfortunately. And this is what liberal women generally thought that I was writing about when I would briefly and sort of semi-obliquely describe my book to them. And I wouldn't usually try to clarify. But viewing your body as an object to sexualize and flaunt, regardless of your proximity to admittedly grotesque beauty standards, is still in line with dualism. There's still this disjunction of the body and the I, the self. So despite feminist analyses of somatophobia and mind-body dualism being not really new at all, I think we have to just keep at it, keep saying these same things, because clearly the point hasn't sunk in. And Plato and these other, even Descartes, really, they're still revered and still taken seriously as the sort of fathers of wisdom and knowledge and philosophy in our society. So you have to keep chipping away at and undermining the reverence for them in order to move those ideologies out of their rootedness.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just incredible when you think about how entrenched they are. And I'm not sure how it is with kids going up through school, now, but when I was growing up, like Plato was close to God, and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, certainly in his opinion.
Yeah. One thing I've wondered is if you put yourself, kind of put people in the place closer to animals, like if we were bonobos, of course, then there's the bonobos and there's the chimps, and when, I don't know, it's kind of weird sometimes when you look at how those animals interact. It's just kind of interesting when you think about some of the things that men do, and as and women do.
For sure. And there are so many different social formations in the animal world too. And the thing about human culture is that we're conscious of it, and we can actively transform it as well, which is a bit different. I don't know, maybe cultural transformation is more possible than we think it is in non-human animals, but we certainly have the capacity to choose and to change our cultures, so we can have all sorts of social formations. Yeah.
Well, right, and it's so funny when you think about, like, if people, it seems like the point of Plato and men is that they want to think that they're so analytic and so smart, and yet if they're so smart, why aren't they figuring out how to live better with the earth, more communally, and all that? It's a weird thing, really, when you think about all that. But let's see, I think Thistle's got some more questions.
Yeah, so you use religious words to describe your ideas about the regenerative and reintegrating powers of nature found within ourselves and outside of ourselves that will help end male dominion. Yet, in your book, you are clearly against male religion, and you even question the value of myths themselves, calling them human artifice that have us experiencing reality through our own inventions rather than directly experiencing the world. Yet you use terms like holy and hallowed and magical to describe the powers of nature, the birthright of every living creature. Can you talk about the difference between religion and spirituality? Is it possible to preserve some aspects of religion and myth, such as group singing, poetry, and rituals that may use religious terms and imagery without falling into the snarls of patriarchal myths that harm? Please discuss your use of religious terms, especially in your last chapter titled Resurrectionary Feminism, and how you delink those terms from patriarchal religion and myth and instead link them to what you consider sacred. What is it that makes something sacred, and how does your concept of the sacred differ from patriarchal religions?
Yeah, for me, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll do my best. For me, the major salient difference between my sort of what I would call mystic materialist understanding and a classic patriarchal religious understanding is that for me, life is what is sacred. It's an organism's aliveness or some form of matter's location in the living world that consecrates it, and which therefore demands reverence. In patriarchal religious conceptualizations, sacredness is acquired through external influence. Something becomes sacred when it is touched by the hand of God, or sacredness is derived from proximity to God in whatever way. and that God or gods is beyond life, beyond the earth, and separate from matter. It's God's position outside of mortal material reality that makes him such a comfort, and the ambition in worshiping this kind of otherworldly, immortal deity is to one day become more like him, to be saved, and saved from what? From life, from death. God and his sacred in men's imaginings is transcendent. He is that which exists without, outside of the world. The sacred, as I conceive of it, is immanent, it's within, and it's a property of earthliness, inseparable from bodies and from ecosystems. Because as far as we know, there is no life elsewhere, which is really makes life itself really miraculous and incredible. When I write of life as sacred, I also mean that we have to honor it, which means honoring the vulnerability of living beings and landscapes to injury, to harm. And this is a reverence that we act on through gentleness to other creatures. Religious men historically have not seen living beings as sacred at all, or only sacred in the sense that they have been granted by the divinity as gifts from the Father God to his chosen sons to be used for man's purposes. So in my view, to instrumentalize another being as existing only for one's purposes rather than for its own is desecration. But men haven't believed this. There's little in their religious ideologies to give them this notion that you shouldn't harm or exploit another. The result of viewing an abstract and immaterial God removed from earthly reality as sacred, and living material creatures as less than sacred and even lowly, has been violence and exploitation for millennia of all kinds, as well as ecocide. As far as the difference between the religious and the spiritual, I think that's a subtler thing to sort of pick apart, and I don't know that I'm the best person to do that. I'm not exactly spiritual, and I tend to approach spirituality with some caution, because again, what is the spirit? As sort of a rigorously anti-dualist person and thinker, I'm disinclined to give the spirit much play in my own thinking. But as far as ritual and ceremony and these things go, I feel like they're incredibly useful cultural practices as a means of solidifying one's commitment to one's values and one's connection and devotion to the world of which one is a part or in which one is located, and all of its mystery. And myth, too. I think myth has great cultural power, but it is cultural. When I say it's artifice, that's not a value-loaded description. It's objective. We make up stories. These are stories. They're fictions. They're artifice. They're invented. They are therefore mediations between us and reality as it stands. And I think we have to be at least willing to come into a direct, unmediated relationship with the world, to come down to ourselves and the shared material reality of humans, other creatures, plants, the dirt, these things. For me, my own sort of practice is I like to go to the woods and I greet chipmunks as friends, and I get really excited about all of the different colors that moss can be and how amazing it is that trees grow. I think about cells, about mitochondria, when I want to connect to the sacred, and that there's ecstasy in that for me.
That was a great answer. Thank you. because I belong to the Reformed Congregation of the Goddess International, and there's so many scholars that are a part of that organization, but yet it is a religion. And, there's a lot to be said for studying religion and participating in it, because it uplifts you. It can connect you. But as long as, like you're saying, you realize this is a creation, and this is not exactly like walking into the woods and having a direct experience of nature. But I know that when I am dancing and singing with other women in ritual, and it can be outside, you can hear the woods singing and you sing back, and so I feel like those group rituals and ceremonies that's our birthright, that's part of nature, that people have done that forever and ever. We've danced and we've sung, maybe not forever and ever. I see you looking a little skeptical. But I do think, language has been around for a really long time in our species, the verbal language, and that there is an exchange that happens with our words and nature that, for me, can, in a group especially, can bring about a deeper connection and a feeling of community and love for life. So I just wanted to thank Aurora, and also thank our audience today for tuning in. Aurora, do you have a few parting words?
Thank you, everyone, for spending this time with us. And I am really happy to be able to speak about the book. I hope that people will find it valuable.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm just going to take a moment and say that, you can get this book at Spinifex Press. You can order it. I am going to be reading it with some friends of mine. We're going to revitalize a little feminist study group. I encourage you all to do the same, and also to get in touch with your local libraries and ask them to have it, because it's a text that can move us to action, to those regenerative powers of nature that can move us forward in our resistance, in our organized resistance. As Aurora was saying, let's get organized. We need to, because the death grip is so serious at this point. The boot on our necks is killing us, literally. And so I hope you all get the book and discuss it with friends and family.
Again, to listen to the entire roundtable discussion with Aurora, go to WLRN's YouTube channel and click on the live tab.
This is WLRN.
WLRN.
Women's Liberation Radio
Women's
News.
Liberation Radio
Women's
News.
Liberation Radio
Women's
News.
Liberation Radio News.
Contemporary primates display their dominance by owning the largest yachts, having the most or largest jets, and now space-traveling rockets. The CO2 emitted by the most dominant so-called alpha male primates is exponentially more than the rest of us. One SpaceX launch emits as much CO2 as several thousand Americans typically emit in 1 year. The most dominant alpha wins, king of the rainforest. Chimpanzees have been playing this game for eons. Chimpanzees and bonobos are the primates most like humans. We have about 98.7% of our DNA in common. The differences are interesting. The bonobos are known for their nonviolent, cooperative living. Some would call it communism. Chimpanzees have a clear hierarchy. The alpha male controls the rest with intimidation and violence. Males control the food. The most dominant gets the choicest parts. Bonobo females redistribute resources. When meat is brought to the group, the oldest female takes over to see that the youngest are taken care of first, then females, and lastly the males. The males accept the arrangement. Evidence suggests early humans were more like bonobos than chimps. The female-led societies shared resources more equitably prior to the rise of so-called advanced civilizations. Orphans and widows were taken care of. In matriarchal societies, women choose their mates as bonobos do and change mates whenever they want. Female bonobos are the sex which leave their family at puberty to join an unrelated group. New females are welcomed into the new group with sex with the females. Females cooperate and bond to avoid male domination and prevent male violence. Perhaps as a result, bonobos have more developed empathy neurons than chimps, as do humans. Chimpanzees live a much more stressful life than bonobos. Chimps evolved so that males know when the females are ovulating and sex is forced. Mothers and others have to be vigilant in protecting the young from aggressive males who sometimes kill them. The whole system revolves around not offending the males, especially the alpha male. Gangs of males work together to enforce this system of domination. Our patriarchal rape culture has similar patterns. Patriarchy was established some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago in human culture. Women became tightly controlled once men wanted to establish paternity. In places like Urokagina, laws were made to prohibit women from having multiple partners or husbands, changing the prior norms. Goddesses were demoted. God granted kings their authority. The king was like an alpha male chimpanzee with a crown and an army. Strongman rule. Women became like property. Like former kings, Trump claims his power is sanctioned by God. In Trump's chimpanzee mind, he is smart because he denigrates and dominates others. He has convinced many that the laws, rules, and norms of our society do not apply to alpha males like him. He knows how to play the game, and he teaches young men his methods. Trump rallies against feminists and immigrants. To him, we are outsider groups that don't belong in his territory. Anyone with potentially bonobo-like minds threaten chimpanzee-minded privileges. In the 70s and 80s, nerds who developed computers and the internet with the help of government programs were collective-minded, more like bonobos than chimps. People embraced the World Wide Web. But over the past decades, realizing the value and potential of collecting data profiles on millions and billions of users, some of those same nerds realized that they could be the alpha males. They watched as money flowed in from advertisers and investors. Like oil tycoons and oligarchs, they bought yachts and jets. With rockets to take them into space, they were the new kings of the rainforest. Meanwhile, with birth control and abortion access, along with some consciousness raising, women as a group took control over their bodies and their lives. Women connected and asserted themselves into what had been male society, the male power structure. Researching topics that men have ignored, women disrupted the fictions and philosophies that have kept them, us, dependent and powerless. So we have seen women making discoveries in science, making contributions in all creative realms, and writing the story of humanity that includes women. Republicans try to stop women who don't accept alpha male dominance from getting too much power. For decades, we have seen that play out. Republicans have used propaganda and misinformation to denigrate women and to reduce women's access to birth control and abortion. Like chimps, Republicans want to limit women's ability to control their own bodies and place in society. Feminists are enemies of their system. Project 2025 is a blueprint for a return to chimpanzee alpha male supremacist rule. The computer nerds, now empowered with data and supercomputers, joined forces with Trump, the dominating primate. Our data was used to manipulate enough of us to vote for the alpha male, and to get just enough people to not vote for a bonobo-minded female who threatened to redistribute our resources. Female power threatens the alpha male hierarchy-based identity. In 2024, like chimpanzees have for millions of years, human primates were convinced to give the most openly abusive male the most power. Republicans, with Trump as their leader, want to exert their dominance over the world while they can, while the United States still has an advantage. Conservatives don't have to be concerned about preserving life on the planet because they believe in an afterlife. Besides, domination-minded primates don't worry about consequences. Men who have resented not having control of birth are in control of death. This has been a long, slow process, but now the world can be vaporized, destroyed with a push of a button. Antagonistic chimpanzee alpha males intent on domination are a threat to all life. Chimpanzees, of course, would never destroy the earth. They don't even destroy their rainforest. While chimpanzees have employed a system of male domination, they don't have the will or mental capacity to cause damage outside of their group. It is the human male mind which has gotten us into our current predicament, and if human minds can't see that, we will be cooked. If anyone is going to save us, it will be a bonobo-minded person, us lovers of life. Any equitable society will be controlled by women because too many men will cave to the chimpanzee alpha male domination model. People in the planet will be better off when people accept the fact that this life is our only life and the earth is the only livable habitat available to us. If the tech nerds want to save the earth, instead of flying off to Mars, they could apply the same data analysis and whatever manipulation techniques they use to get the likes of Trump elected to get people to care enough about life on this planet to save it. Our society needs to return to prioritizing the children who are born, so future people grow up with lots of empathy neurons and an understanding of their connection to the rest of life on our sphere of the universe. I want to thank Aurora for her wonderful book, Man Against Being, Body Horror and the Death of Life, and to Thistle and WLRN for providing me the opportunity to express my thoughts on this podcast. This has been Margaret Moss. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to WLRN's 106th edition podcast on ecofeminism. WLRN would like to thank Aurora and Margaret for sharing their views on this topic. Until next time, this is Frida Bear signing off on another WLRN podcast.
If you like what you're hearing and would like to donate to the cause of feminist community radio, please visit our WordPress site and click on the donate button. That's WLRNmedia.com. Check out our merch tab to get a nice gift in exchange for your donation. And if you're interested in joining our team, we're always looking for new volunteers to conduct interviews, write blog posts, post to our Facebook and other social media pages, and do other tasks to keep us moving forward as a collective of media activist women. Thank you for listening. This is Thistle signing off for now.
And this is Aurora signing off on another edition of WLRN's monthly handcrafted podcast. I just want to take one moment to thank Thistle and all of the other women at WLRN for devoting the time this month to my book. I truly appreciate it. Anyway, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Spinster, Overit, and SoundCloud, in addition to our WordPress site. Thank you for listening.
And I'm Mary. Thanks for tuning in. Next month, we will focus our program on Andrea Dworkin and the republication of right-wing women. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out the first Thursday of the month, so look for it on Thursday, March 6th. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when each podcast, music show, and interview are released, please sign up for our newsletter on the WLRN WordPress site. Stay strong in the struggle, and thanks for listening.
And this is Anne Castillo. Our monthly podcasts are always crafted with tender, loving care and in solidarity with women worldwide. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you, so please share, like, and comment widely.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that, where is home?